Good morning. I don't know if I've ever been so excited to see 20 to 30 people, but it is very exciting. It feels like the whole building is full, and it's been kind of a lonely past 2.5 months or so. So it's great. It's great to have all of you who are here and all who are watching at home. We welcome you as well. So glad for everyone that could be here. Larry Van Cleef sent me a very excellent video last week, and it was a short, like 2-minute video of this country fella just talking about the hands of Jesus. And it impacted me so much, I thought, man, I just have to turn that into a Lord's Supper sermon. So what I did is I took at least a lot of that video, kind of the core of that video, and I expanded on a lot of the concepts, added a lot of my own, and turned it into the talk that I'm going to deliver to you today. Our hands are powerless in and of themselves. And I realize that Ecclesiastes 9 says, whatever your hand finds to do, do with all your might. And so there is value at working hard, putting your hands to work with something and doing it diligently. And I also realize that today is Mother's Day, and there is something very beautiful about the laboring, nurturing, diligent hands of a mother. However, it's possible that we put too much emphasis on what our hands do. Jesus' hands are infinitely more powerful than our hands. It is the hands of Jesus that make all the difference. The usefulness of a thing depends on whose hands it is in. The value of a thing depends on whose hands it is in. It all depends on whose hands something is in. You saw the props that I brought with me. See this tennis racket here? In my hands, this tennis racket is worth $15. $14.97 plus tax. I know because I bought it a few days ago at Walmart. That's exactly how much this thing is worth. And that's exactly how much I'm going to return it for. But I wanted to use it as an illustration. Because you put this same $15 tennis racket in the hands of Roger Federer, and all of a sudden, it might be worth $15 million or more. This basketball is worth, in my hands, $5. That's how much I paid for it. I thought it was a good deal. Put it in the hands of LeBron James, it might be worth $30 to $40 million. This football, I don't have any idea how much it's worth. Now it's probably not worth $4 or $5. We probably bought it for $10 or a little more. Put the same football in the hands of Tom Brady, might be worth $50 to $60 million. You see, it all depends on whose hands a thing is in. Let's turn our Bibles to Exodus chapter 14. Exodus chapter 14. I did not bring a staff. I was tempted, but I did not bring a staff, a stick. But if I had one in my hands, I can do a few tricks with a staff, but nothing in comparison to a staff in the hands of Moses. In this chapter of Exodus 14, the Israelites have exited. They have come out of Egypt, but they haven't crossed the Red Sea, and Pharaoh decides that he's sorry that he let them go, and so he sends his army to go and chase them down. And the Israelites see the Egyptians coming, and they're terrified, and they're kind of trapped, and they begin complaining against Moses, and Moses begins crying out to the Lord. And in verse 15, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. As for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land.'" And then the angel of the Lord that had been in front of them went behind them. And the pillar of fire that had been in front of them went behind them throughout the night as a barrier to protect them from the Egyptians. And in verse 21 it says, "Then Moses stretched out his hand," and he had that staff, of course, "stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea and of course, stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea and of course, stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea and of course, stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea and of course, stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea and of course, stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea and of course, stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea and of course, stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea and of course, stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned the sea and of course, stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and turned. Then Samson said, "With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey I have killed 1,000 men." When he had finished speaking, he threw the jawbone from his hand, and he named that place Ramoth Lehi. Jawbone of a donkey in my hands might scare away a raccoon. In the hands of Samson, killed 1,000 men. It all depends on whose hands a thing is in. Let's go to 1 Samuel 17. 1 Samuel 17. A while back, Stone was into making slings. I don't mean slingshots, and I don't mean a sling that you put your arm in. I mean a sling like they used in ancient times. Strap of leather with a pouch in the middle. And you put a rock right there in the pouch, and you put the two ends of the leather strap together, and you swing that around, release one of the ends of the strap, and off goes the rock. I'm not very good with a sling. A sling in my hands is basically nothing more than a toy. But it's a different story when a sling is in the hands of David. In this chapter, Goliath, of course, challenges the Israelites. David goes out to face him. Verse 39, he girds a sword and puts on armor. Of course, that's not going to work for David. Verse 40 says, he took his stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even in his pouch. And his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. After some back and forth in their conversation, we go down to verse 48. Then it happened when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand into his bag and took from it a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him. The sling in my hands is nothing but a toy. In the hands of David, it killed Goliath. It all depends on whose hands a thing is in. Well, now let's turn to Matthew 14, and we're going to transition now to talk about Jesus. Matthew 14. 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish in my hands might feed my family and maybe a couple of other people if I'm lucky. Different story when you have 5 loaves and two fish in the hands of Jesus. Jesus in this chapter was trying to get away from the crowds, and they kept seeking him out. There were thousands of them out there. They had nothing to eat, and all the disciples had among them were 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Verse 19 says, ordering the people to sit down on the grass, he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food. And breaking the loaves, he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. They picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 full baskets. There were about 5,000 men who ate, besides women and children. 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish in my hands might feed a few people. In the hands of Jesus, fed thousands. It all depends on whose hands the thing is in. You see, the hands of Jesus make all the difference. Our worries and our cares and our frustrations in our hands, well, that's all they're ever going to be. But put those same worries and cares and frustrations in the hands of Jesus, and he'll take care of them for you. Cast all your cares upon the Lord, for he cares for you. Our lives in our own hands are fragile and meaningless. In Jesus' hands, they are secure and infinitely valuable. It all depends on whose hands it is in. I have one more contrast. If I had 2 nails in my hands, and I actually brought 2 nails and I left them out in my car, I might be able to build a birdhouse, maybe. I might be able to use those nails to serve as some kind of peg on the wall to hang a coat or something like that. But 2 nails in the hands of Jesus earn salvation for all who trust him and who believe in him. All of us, because of our sin, we deserve death. The wages of sin is death. And the only one who deserves to die for my sin is me. You might say, well, I'd love to die for Adam's sin, and that would be very kind of you to offer, but you can't do that because you have your own sin to die for. So really what we all deserve is 2 nails through our hands. We all deserve that death on the cross that Jesus experienced. And so 2 nails through our hands, 2 nails in our hands, is just what we deserve. In the hands of Jesus, however, it is a one-time offering for all mankind for all time. It all depends on whose hands it is in. The hands of Jesus accomplished more than the hands of Moses, more than the hands of Samson, more than the hands of David, and are infinitely more powerful than our own. So this morning, as we take the Lord's Supper, let us be mindful of the hands of Jesus. Be mindful of the eternal power that is in his hands alone. Be thankful that our troubles and our cares and our worries are in his hands and not in our hands. Be thankful that our lives are in his hands and not in our own. Be thankful that our salvation is in his hands and not our own. And most of all, let us be thankful for the nails that were in his hands and not in our own.